Hello, everybody, and welcome to CoMotion Labs Fundamentals for FinTech Startups. I'm Brady Ryan, CoMotion Labs Hardware Manager. If you joined us before, you know that CoMotion Labs is the University of Washington's effort around startup incubation. We operate 3 incubators here on campus: a hardware incubator, which is mine, a life science incubator, and a software tech incubator called Startup Hall, where we have a wonderful partnership with BECU, which you'll hear more about shortly. We don't take equity in our startups. We don't take any of your IP. We just want to help startups succeed. If you are a founder looking for somewhere to live, we have a little bit of capacity. So let's talk. If you're a FinTech founder or thinking about launching a FinTech startup, we've just opened up applications for the next cohort of startups in our FinTech Accelerator with BECU. It's a great program, and cohort companies get to interface consistently with all the smart folks at BECU and get exposure to how things are done at a large credit union. It's an awesome program and well worth applying for. While we wait for everyone to join us, I'll make a few quick announcements. Next week, Matt Oppenheimer, the co-founder and CEO of Remitly, will present Customer Centricity, the Cornerstone of Culture. All of our fundamentals presentations are available on the CoMotion website under innovation training videos, as well as on YouTube. And for a full schedule and to register for future events, visit bit.ly/CoMotion fundamentals. Please also subscribe on YouTube if you like, and you'll be notified of future live streams. And lastly, this program, Fundamentals for Startups, is funded in part by a grant from the Economic Development Agency. We will be dropping a link in the chat very shortly to a quick survey. This really helps us stay on their good side, so they keep giving us the funding to do this. So if you could quickly fill that out, we would very much appreciate it. This month, we are proud to partner with BECU to support the Fundamentals for Startups program. And in a little bit, Mike Zell from BECU will be joining us. But first, we have a quick video to show you how BECU, Washington's largest not-for-profit credit union, is helping grow the FinTech community and inspire innovation in the Pacific Northwest.
On behalf of BECU, welcome to Fundamentals for Startups, the FinTech series. I'm Mike Zell, Senior Vice President of Digital at BECU. BECU is a credit union focused on offering long-term solutions to support the financial well-being of our members and communities, and our partnership with CoMotion helps us do that. Emerging technologies have the potential to benefit both benefit and disrupt our members' sense of security and control, and we are committed to being at the forefront of innovation in the financial services space. BECU has partnered with CoMotion over the last 3 years to support the growth of FinTech in the Puget Sound. To date, we have supported 11 FinTech startups through the BECU FinTech Incubator and offered grants through the FinTech track of the CoMotion Innovation Gap Fund. We have learned so much through this collaboration. If you would like to apply to be part of the next incubator cohort, please visit the website you see on the screen. We also dropped the link into the chat. This month, we are proud to contribute speakers to the Fundamentals for Startups FinTech series, which continues each Friday in January. We hope you enjoy these speakers. Today, Nat Cartwright from FinAI is here to present Just Do It, Launch Your Product Now. Nat Cartwright is the co-founder and COO of FinAI, a financial technology company that assists banks and credit unions, including BECU, I might add, in developing AI-powered personal banking assistants. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from McGill University, a Master of Public Health from Lund University in Sweden, and a Master of Business Administration from IE Business School in Spain. Prior to founding FinAI, Natalie worked at the Global Fund in Geneva, where she served as a program officer managing a $250 million health investment portfolio. She serves on the AI Advisory Council of Canada, is the chair of the Artificial Intelligence Network of British Columbia, a member of the Industrial Research Assistance Program, IRAP Advisory Board, and an adjunct professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. Nat will take all questions via chat. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. Brady will be back for the Q&A, and I will now turn the event over to Nat.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction and for inviting me to this event. I love getting to speak to different people who are interested in the financial technology space, and BECU has just been such a pleasure to work with. So it's fun to get to be together in this type of forum. Thank you so much for the invitation. My goal for today is to tell you a little bit about who we are as a company, to run through how we got started, and to talk about artificial intelligence, which is something that is at the core of our product and something that I like to speak to. And my hope is that you get to take away a little bit of inspiration in going ahead and just doing it. Took a little nod to Nike there, because that's really how you get started. So let me start by just talking about my company and who we are to give you some context. The company I run is called FinAI, and we build virtual financial assistants for the banking world. So today we're a company of about 40 people. Our goal is a SaaS-based company, so our goal is to be able to scale our customer base without scaling too many more people. We're based out of Vancouver, Canada, and we're a founding team of 3 people. So myself and an Australian and an Indian business partner who've all come together to build this. We were founded in 2014, so we're coming up on our 8th year anniversary. And as you'll see, it was a little bit of a windy road to get where we are today. If we look at where we are in terms of our customer base today from our global map, we've got coverage around the world. We work with the likes of the 6th largest financial institution in Canada, great customers like BECU, credit unions across the US. And we also have some international stakeholders as well, customers like Time Bank in South Africa, who are trying to make banking accessible to people who may not have banks available to them today, or at least not in a cost-effective way. So a pretty wide scope, although we generally focus today in North America and medium to large size banks. So I'm going to start off with the story of how we got started. Slide 5. So my background was originally in public health. I was working in Geneva. I was working for the largest financing institution for HIV, TB, and malaria, and I was really interested in that world. I thought that I was going to stay in international development for my whole career. I happened to be there when the financial crisis hit, and I realized that if we were really going to be successful with international development, we needed stronger business principles. So I went off to Madrid to do an MBA, knowing full well that I was going to go back to my really nice job in Geneva after the program, and kind of got interested in entrepreneurship when I was there at Madrid, and started doing their Incubator program, which I think sounds really similar to the one that is available at UW, and met a few different people and ended up starting a business in the space. So we wanted to do kind of an Airbnb, but for local spaces like dance studios that are available and only use 20% of their capacity. So ended up doing that. We were kind of moderately successful, started to get a bit of traction, even won the top award. So here we are, 2 teams winning the top award at the end of our MBA program. And I wanted to continue, but unfortunately my business partners at the time didn't. So I moved home to Vancouver, where I spent a bit of time trying to think through what can I do next and how can I start a company. And this guy standing next to me here is my now business partner. He was still in Spain. We were friends in the MBA, but we didn't really know each other. And he called and said, hey, do you want to do this business with me? I'm interested in doing the Venmo, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. If you're not, the peer-to-peer lending, peer-to-peer payment platform that's available in the US for the Canadian market. So he said, do you want to do it with me? So I quickly Googled it. He asked me if I was interested in FinTech. I quickly Googled FinTech because I had to figure out what that was. And kind of as a joke, I said, I'll do it with you if you want to move to Vancouver. And the joke was on me because 3 weeks later, Jake Tyler showed up. He had a snowboard bag, a bike box, a suit, and a suitcase. And he forgot his very nice suit on the plane, which I thought was perfectly suited for starting a startup. We proceeded to then get cracking and try to build this peer-to-peer platform. So we had some fun adventures along the way. We did it for a couple of years, and it turns out that the Canadian market is very different than other markets. Every market's a little bit different, and that it was not a great place to start. We had a lot of barriers to entry. We couldn't get access to payment rails. We didn't really have a business model behind it, so there's no way that you get revenue. And we really spun our wheels for a couple of years. We tried really hard. We did all right. We had about $800,000 in small payments. The average payment size was $30, coast to coast across Canada. We did manage to get about 10,000 downloads of our app, but ultimately this was where we ended up. We had to shut down our platform, and probably one of the toughest few months of my life, when you really invest everything that you've got in doing something only to realize that ultimately you've failed. But there were some really interesting components to what we had built, and we were really fortunate that there was some interest in part of this component that we had around AI, early stages of AI, and making predictions about where people wanted to make payments. And we were a really great founding team together, and had some said, you know, maybe we should try to pivot. Maybe we should see what we can do here. So this was sort of the idea that we had. We thought that we could be the intermediary between all of these different chat channels, because we really believe that chat was an emerging technology and the guiding interface. So this was probably circa 2015, and that we could help be this intermediary. So this is an example of what our first prototype looked like. It was in Facebook Messenger. And it was just trying to do simple payments. And we were fortunate enough to have one bank who was pretty innovative. They also had an innovation lab, and they said, you know, we're interested in doing a proof of concept with you to see where we can take this. So we went back out to the market. We knew that we had a strong founding team. We knew that we had kind of found something that actually might be of interest to the market. The business model was much more interesting in that it was B2B and a SaaS product, and working with banks who obviously bring a lot to the table in terms of partnership, and there's a really nice synergy there. And we were able to convince investors to continue to invest in us. They liked us as a founding team. We worked really well together, and ultimately were able to raise a Series A financing. So this was now a few years ago. My founding team, Jake and Guru, and myself, and we were able to continue on. So wanted to share the story for a couple of reasons. The name of this talk is Just Do It. And the first is, I had no experience in financial technology. I know a lot about HIV, TB, and malaria when I started this, but like everything else, you jump in and you learn as you go, and it's amazing how quickly you pick things up. And now, you know, almost 10 years in, I have learned a lot, and would consider myself to be pretty proficient in the area, including teaching on it these days. The second thing is, I don't know a single startup who has started with the right product idea, but you have to do something and you have to learn as you go. So learning and failing and stumbling over things as you go is part of the process. And the sooner you dive into it, the sooner you're going to get to the other side where you figure out what it is that you actually need and you want. And still today we do this. We've got a product that's in market. You know, the large majority of it works, but part of the ethos of what we need to continue to do is to think about what's working and what's not working, and where do we continually iterate. So, you know, if you're thinking about entering the space, even if you don't have experience, I encourage you to give it a shot. Even if you're not sure about your idea, I encourage you to go for it, because that's how you take one step forward. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about artificial intelligence. I hope that I've convinced you to dive in and to go for it, particularly if you've got a great accelerator program to support you through the way, which you do in this case. So many of your ideas might incorporate artificial intelligence. If they don't, at some point in the future, they will. AI is sort of becoming like the internet was in the 2000s, where we aren't going to have AI companies for much longer. Every company is going to incorporate it. So what is it that we're really talking about for anyone who might feel intimidated by the term? Artificial intelligence is an overarching term. There's lots of definitions out there. It's a, within the subcategory, there's different types of artificial intelligence, machine goes through an algorithm, you get a prediction. Just go to the next slide. So as simple as it gets for most of the things that I'm thinking through, this is from a business perspective at the highest level tends to work. And there's a really great book that I'll talk about later called Prediction Machines that really talks about this. So ultimately, where do we, what predictions can we leverage today where we can get some interesting value from them and ultimately create business models around them? The world at FinAI, where we create predictions, is we make predictions about what it is that the person's trying to ask in the retail banking space. So when you go to BECU's online channel, if you want to ask something about your balance, for example, or product they might have available, our algorithm can understand what it is and help serve that up to you in a seamless way. So very simple prediction. In financial technology, there's all kinds of predictions. There's huge amounts of data sets that are available as well. And what we're really seeing is this big paradigm shift. So in the 1980s, we had this move towards home computers. That was one big paradigm shift. I remember my first home computer. It was a huge Apple. It basically could do really basic Word files and had this really great shark game. The second big transformation that we had was moving to online. So that was in the 1990s, early 2000s, when we started to go internet first. The third was when we went mobile first. The first app was only launched in 2008. So today, as this is filmed, this is 2022, just over a decade ago when apps started to launch. Today we run most of our lives, at least I do, through applications. And now we're starting to enter this AI first world. And it will be as transformational as the other types of technologies. And it will follow the same path in that when it first starts out in a consumer facing way, which is where we are today, it's been around for a long time, but when it first starts out in a consumer facing way, what we see is relatively modest. But over time, these technologies really disrupt how we expect businesses to interact with us and how we interact with businesses. The only thing that will be different about this paradigm shift as we move into an AI first world is that it'll probably be faster than what we've seen with the other ones. So we're starting to get into it, starting to see some really great applications. I'm sure many of you use artificial intelligence in your day-to-day life, whether it's the Siris or Alexas or Google Homes or algorithms that make recommendations for you. And we will just see more and more of these that come available. So you can take my word for it. Lots of other people have said the same thing. This is from CEO of Google. We're at a seminal moment in computing. It's clear to me we're evolving from a mobile world to an AI first world. And one caveat for people who are interested in using artificial intelligence is when we look at Uber, for example, there's certainly elements of Uber that are interesting from that leverage artificial intelligence to help deliver that user experience. But some of the best features of Uber have nothing to do with artificial intelligence. So my personal favorite is when you're sitting there and you're waiting for the car to arrive, you can see exactly where it is and you can track it and see when it's at a stoplight, which is a really delightful thing. You can get a sense of when you're actually going to be able to be picked up. And so user experience still is the most important thing when you're thinking about product and designing product and iterating through product. Artificial intelligence can certainly be something that adds a lot of value, but use it where it makes sense and make sure that user experience is still front and center, particularly when you're dealing with FIs, because that is what the majority of FIs that I see today are really interested in, is how do we match that user experience that members or customers expect to see thanks to the tech companies that they're interacting with every day. So where does artificial intelligence make sense? I'll just skip to the next slide here. And so this is an example of, I'll speak to where artificial intelligence makes sense from the perspective of virtual assistants in conversational AI, because it's what I know and what I work in, but the principles are the same regardless if you're making predictions about who should get a mortgage or what investments to make or any type of prediction that you're trying to make. So the principles stay the same, but I'll speak to it from the perspective of conversational AI. So this was an example, a real life example from about 5 or 6 years ago. I was on a ferry. I live in Vancouver, Canada, and I saw this cup, this Coca-Cola cup that said, enter this code, log into Facebook Messenger, enter this code, and you will be able to download a conversational assistant and you'll be able to do a few things. So I downloaded it. We happened to be on a company retreat. There was 8 of us who were there. We all downloaded it and had to play with it. And it was very simple. It could say hello. It could tell a few jokes. We all circled through them. It had about four, what I would put in the category of kind of cheesy jokes. Could say goodbye, and you had a chance to win a Spotify playlist. So extremely simple, one channel, Facebook Messenger, quite a while ago. And I think that this was really a good example of what we would see with very early tests of artificial intelligence, particularly of this platform and predictions. If you look at it objectively, it really probably does not add a lot of value or create a lot of interest or engagement. It was very limited, but I suspect that it was a really great learning tool internally in terms of what does it take to build a tool like this? What type of engagement do we get? How do people actually interact with it? Maybe even building up a bit of a data set around what do those conversations look like. So I would see that this is something that we tend to see in early stages. Almost every type of AI that I see today are beyond this, particularly in the FI stage, but an interesting starting point, and it's been fun to see how this evolves. The next generation, which is I think what we're seeing today, which is lots of different channels, much more deeply integrated in terms of what we do with our day-to-day life and more meaningful predictions that can come through. So from our product, the examples of things that we can do today are being able to understand what people say, but also to direct them to a human agent for conversations that can't be handled by a virtual assistant. It's a classic 80-20 rule where an individual is very much needed for 20% of the conversations. Often we can deal with the high volume, low complexity tasks with good predictability. And also starting to make some early proactive predictions for people. So knowing who you are and being able to make suggestions about things that might be relevant to you, whether that's a product offering or a suggestion of an action that you may want to take. And then I want to talk about where I think that what this could look like in the future. I don't know if this is going to be exactly right or not, but once I'm through with this example, I'll talk through some of the principles that I'm almost certain will be correct. So I can imagine a world where I wake up in the morning and say, everything will be at a stage where all of our devices will be connected thoroughly into the Internet of Things. So maybe my fridge will have looked at my calendar and said, look, I can see you're going to the gym today. I know that you like to eat protein before you go to the gym. Do you want to have chicken stir fry for dinner? Say, yeah, love to. Great. Look at, see what ingredients are available. We'll make an order to the grocery store. Of course, all the payments are seamlessly behind the scenes. Everything's integrated. Those things all disappear into the background. I would say that on the way home from the office, in my car, I drive by and pick them up, but we're, at least in our company, we're remote first now. So maybe get dropped off and then I can go ahead and make my dinner. And when I give that example, I usually ask people, does this sound fantastic to you? Or does this sound scary to you? And I usually get most people raising their hand for both. So could be a bit of both. Part of what the future will look like is also getting to choose a lot of our preferences around what we want to do and won't want to do. And like I said, I don't know if that's exactly what that user experience will look like, but there's some things that are certainly going to be true about it. So the first is that it's going to be a much more proactive world because we're able to create predictions at a high volume for low cost. We'll be able to push recommendations to people in a very So in the example around what I might want to eat for dinner or what I might want to do later in the day. The second is that things will be very predictive. Like I have said throughout, what we're really moving into is in a world where we can make predictions with a lot of frequency and much more accuracy. So we will be able to say, this is what I think. And the critical part is that we have individuals and people who are responsible for making a judgment about if that prediction should be used, yes or no, and take accountability for the ethical overlay of that. And the third is that we're going to reach a stage where it's much more personalized. Today, when we look at how we are offered products or how we interact with businesses or other places, we tend to be put into categories because that's really what we can manage. So of a certain demographic, of a certain age, of a certain income bracket. And as we move more and more into an AI first world, what we'll see is that the level of personalization that we can achieve will be much higher. So our expectations will change around, for example, what our FIs are able to offer us in terms of product recommendations that really suit us as an individual. And this book is really, it's just fantastic. And I strongly recommend it if you're at all interested in the world of artificial intelligence. It's kind of a business 101. And so it says the economics offer clear insight regarding the business application. The drop of cost and predictions will impact the value of other things, increase the value of complements, and diminishing the value of substituents. So as you think about what businesses might be of interest, and as you start to think about building your financial technology business, this is a great framework to think about from the future, which is things that help us make predictions, basic economics, increase in value. So the value of data is hugely increased because this is the lifeblood of being able to make predictions. Something that is wonderful about the FI space is there's a lot of data that's available today, really interesting data that we can still overlay with technology to be able to add value to end consumers. And the question is, how do you think about accessing that data? How do you divide who owns what data in the world that we're in? For example, we care less about IP at my company and more about the data and how we divide that. And we found a way that we can kind of share the pie with our FIs so that we can all leverage it and benefit from it and hopefully create end user value. The second thing that becomes really important is this human judgment piece. So we will have a lot more data in our hands. We will have a lot more predictions that are coming forward. And something that we will need more of is people being able to say, should we use it or not? We know that our existing data, there can be biases that exist within it. There can be ethical considerations, business considerations. Does this create value or not? So that's an area where we'll see existing employees move into more of is how do we actually manage all of these? The bad news for us is that the value of human predictions becomes less important as we move into this AI first world. So what we'll see, for example, we might see less of analysts making individual stock picks, more of them getting recommendations and being able to go through those recommendations and applying an overlay of intelligence to them. So if you get a chance, definitely recommend picking up Prediction Machines. If you don't want to read the book, there's a really good website. It gives a pretty good overview. There's even a 3-minute YouTube video that it gets you a good amount of the information. So great tool as you think about AI, particularly the FinTech space. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is how do you actually get from A to B with artificial intelligence? So we've spoken about do something, get out there, go for it. We've spoken about where artificial intelligence really coming to the forefront of this new paradigm that we're in. We've spoken a little bit about how you think about where to use artificial intelligence, the importance of data, thinking about being predictive, personalized, and proactive. And then the last thing that I want to speak about is really how do you get started and what is the best way to work, from getting from A to B. Artificial intelligence is an evolving type of technology. It's a learning technology, but it's also relatively new for the majority of people who are working with it and who are consuming it. It's a technology that's been around for a long time, but it's really starting to come to life in a consumer-facing way. Mike kindly gave an introduction, and he shared that we work with BECU, and I think that they're a really great example of how to roll out artificial intelligence in a way that makes sense. So if you look at their story, which we are not part of since the beginning, but I know a little bit about it, is they were interested in working with virtual assistants, and they started off with a smaller scale tool, had some really talented people who just dove in, got started, did a lot of the building themselves, and learned along the way. So when we first met them, they had already launched something. They knew what they liked, they knew what they didn't like, they knew what worked well, they knew what didn't work well. They thought about, okay, how do we move to this next step? And we've been working together now for about a year, have gone live to market, and are still thinking about how do we continually grow this, including leveraging other partners and that move together. So it's one, thinking about moving in an agile way, starting with something small. When Mike and I were just chatting quickly before the beginning of this presentation, something that he shared with me was one of the things that they look for is being able to easily do a proof of concept with a company, and having that ease to test things out and see how it works, and if there might be opportunity to create shared value together. So when you're thinking about starting to work with FIs or starting to launch a fintech, how can you create an easy way to be able to work together and test? And then how can you find partners who are willing to work in a graduated risk way? So you start with something, maybe you start small, maybe you don't, with a limited group, and then scale it appropriately as the risk goes, as the risk increases, or as you're launching it in a larger scale in a more meaningful way. BECU was not our first customer, but our first customer worked in a very similar way to this. Your first customer is fundamental to success. I can genuinely say that without our first customer and them helping us navigate through, we would not have been successful. So strongly recommend that if you are at the stage where you're thinking about getting your first customer, or you're early in customers, getting to be part of an accelerator, getting access to an FI who's willing to work with you and understands how you actually build product and work through that startup cycle, it's a great opportunity, and something that was fundamental for our success. I'm going to stop there, and I would be delighted to take any questions that you have. And thank you so much again for the invitation and for letting me share my story.
That is perfect, Nat. Thank you so much. Love a super insightful presentation. Everybody get to the chat box, start asking questions. We've got some time for these. I have some questions kind of to start with before we get folks coming in. And one of them, you're talking about partnerships and finding those first customers. And partnerships seem like a huge deal, especially for a fintech, probably. Can you describe kind of that dating process? I assume at some point, if it's your first customer, your first partner, you just kind of need access. But when you get choosy with partners, how does that back and forth look when you're finding, is this the institution we want to really partner with? Are they aligned? Kind of how does that process work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And partnerships are really challenging in financial technology because, generally speaking, small startups are small and FIs tend to be very big. So there's a lot of shared value that can be created because you've got different strengths and different weaknesses, but the expectation and the amount of due diligence and the operational overhead is very different. So I can say that we've had now multiple experiences where we've worked with the wrong partners, and on more than one occasion, without exaggeration, it has nearly been the end of us. So it's a great question in that it is really important. I would say that our first customer, and when you're looking for a first customer, you really want to find a partner who will act as a partner and who will help you work through. So they understand where you are as a company. Maybe they've got some systems in place for how they help evaluate if it's a business model that makes sense, the types of controls that you need in place to be able to work successfully together. Obviously, compliance and risk is a big component of working in financial technology, and that can be a challenge when you're first starting out, and who have that risk appropriate mindset. So sometimes FIs, I guess maybe perhaps the more traditional end of things, it's sort of here's all the controls we need in place and that's it. And when you're first starting out as a startup, it's really challenging to have things like your ISO or your SOC 2 standards in place right from the outget. So how do you find people who say, okay, well, what we're launching is a POC, and so let's make sure that we have the right controls in place, but we probably don't need everything out of the gate. And so find those people who understand working in an agile way, who understand working with startups. And just like when you're looking for co-founders, just like when you're looking for first employees, those first partners, you want to find a great cultural fit who have the same ethos as you do.
And do you find that smaller financial institutions, maybe credit unions, tend to be more aligned, more risk appropriate, maybe than like a larger, take your pick, gigantic bank that everybody knows?
I would say as a generalization, absolutely. So the smaller FIs tend to be able to move more quickly, often the way that they see themselves competing, and part of what they want to work on from a strategic advantage perspective is how do we move more quickly from the technology perspective. Credit unions are well known for really caring about the user experience, and it's a bit different than a bank. So we've had a lot of success there to the point that we work exclusively with a certain size of bank and credit union, and we'll no longer work with the big players because we just get gobbled up in the bureaucracy. I'm sure that there's outliers on both sides of it, but in our experience, we've really found that sweet spot.
Great. Yeah. Pay attention, founders. And if you want to start working with a really good local credit union, the applications are open for the accelerator at the BECU. I'd love to hear, I don't talk to a ton of Canadian founders. What's it like building a startup in Canada? How is it different than the States? You mentioned a little bit about the Canadian market wasn't a fit for what you were doing. But yeah, I'd love to just hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when you're thinking of something that's interesting about financial technology is that you have these natural borders around countries. So for some types of technology. So for example, the peer-to-peer payment platform, we needed access to the payment rails. We were doing payments within the Canadian market. It's very difficult to scale that to another market because not just because of the regulatory pieces, but because of the actual infrastructure that you need to access, which is why if you look at things like peer-to-peer payments, almost every country has a different provider. It's not like Airbnb where it's all over the world. And that's true for a lot of financial products. When we did our pivot and we moved to virtual financial assistance, we moved away from that constraint because we weren't involved. So we integrate with banks. So it's, we're a user experience that's layered on top of it, but we aren't touching any of the payments. We aren't touching any of the personally identifiable information. What we're doing is we're overlaying a natural language processing engine that understands how people speak to the retail banking. So that means that we can scale internationally without those constraints of having to, of course, we have to meet security requirements, but they're not the same when you're actually dealing with people's money, when you're holding their information. So it's a really nice synergy between what banks and credit unions do best and what we can do, which is build a really innovative product quite quickly that is, I would say, that we can scale to different banks and credit unions without them losing out on the differentiated experience. They add in their brand, they add in their products. So it feels like it is BECU or whatever bank that we're working with. So those are really important considerations when you're thinking about your business model. Like I said, you get started and you start to figure these things out. We didn't appreciate that at the beginning, but
Sure. A question from Francisco Quintero. He asked, how did you find your co-founders? I think you mentioned that you met your co-founders in the MBA, but any advice for single founders out there, or maybe a non-technical person looking for a technical co-founder, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, so one of my co-founders I met in the MBA program, and the other one was a friend through the MBA program. My second co-founder is originally from India, and he was working in the tech space there. My friend Tanis Jorge just wrote a whole book on how to find co-founders. The most likely reason that you're going to fail out of the gate is because the co-founding relationship does not work. So Jorge, I think it's a great question. It's such an important thing to get right. It's worth investing in at the beginning. There's lots of different there's lots of different groups that are available. So there's different meetup groups, there's different programs that are available, and even doing an accelerator program, right? You start to find people. Not every company is going to work out. So how do you just get involved in the entrepreneurial market and you just start to network your way through? One great tip that I had from Tanis when I was speaking to her about finding great co-founders and the research that she's done on it is one of the most successful people that she'd spoken to says that their strategy is right out of the gate. They do one incredible act of generosity very deliberately with their co-founder because it sets the tone for the relationship. So things that I think are kind of non-starters, if you're negotiating heavily over equity or anything like that at the beginning, it's probably not a great sign. Just, are you on the same page? Do you have the same value set? Do you have complementary skills? At the beginning, there's no value in an idea. So don't worry about the small stuff, worry about building trust.
Sheng Wei asks, first of all, thank you for the super motivational presentation. And then they say, I was wondering, when did your business start to profit and when did you get a consistent income stream?
So we're a venture capital, venture-backed company. So we started getting during our pivot, part of the reason that we were able to go out and raise more venture capital was because we had a customer who was willing to pay out of the gate. Again, this was a customer who was willing to take risks. They had a incubator program. They wanted to try and interact with companies like us. So it was really, can we build something? But they were willing to pay out of the gate. So on this new business model, we had revenue basically from the get-go, and then we've incrementally built it from there. And something that's nice is because we're working with FIs, we're able to get relatively long subscription contracts in place, which gives us certainty around the business so that we can continue to invest in our roadmap and in our business and product.
Two questions that kind of go together. So Francisco asks, what were the first steps to build an MVP and raise a seed round? And then Sheng Wei followed up with, how much energy did you put into the technology build out and how much into the marketing and scaling, and kind of where should a team focus? So in the early days, kind of what's that ratio of effort and energy put into the technical side and how much into like the businessy side?
That's a great question. And I don't think we got it right. So I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know if my answer is going to be right. I would say the go-to, right? So we were part of an accelerator program. We did have different milestones each week that helped guide us and helped us sort of think through this. I would say we were warned about overbuilding the technology before we had product market fit, and that we would likely do that, and that to avoid it, and we did it anyways. So from our perspective, we did build an app, we did access payment rails, we spent a lot of time on building it, and then we realized, oh, we need people to use it. And then when people start using it, you understand what the behaviors are and what you got wrong from the design. So I think that the Bible on building things is the lean startup. Like tons and tons on it. It's how much can you kind of fake it to actually see what people will do. People will tell you they'll do something, and then what they actually do is very, very different. So I think the right answer is how much information can you get from real consumers? How much can you actually put out there and start to see what adoption looks like? Figure out what your growth engine is. So I'd say build the least that you need to be able to do that, because like I said at the beginning, it's almost certain that what you do out of the gate won't be right, but you need to do something to figure out how you need to iterate from there. So the least, if I were to do it again, I would build the least technology I could get away with to get more information about what I should actually build.
And how built out technically was the product when you got the first bank signed on?
It was not built out. We had a really good deck, a really good deck. 2 years of failure under our belt, a strong team. I wish that we'd met BECU earlier in our journey, but the bank that we worked with called ATB Financial is very similar in terms of ethos, where they're willing to, they knew that we were a strong team. They were impressed that we had built something, even though we weren't going to be able to scale that business model. And they were just willing to, it was a small bet, but they took enough of a bet on us that it gave enough confidence to investors to put down a bit more. So those were the things that helped us go. And then we delivered. They gave us 4 weeks to build something in Facebook Messenger. It was very small. It was a tiny proof of concept, but I've never project managed anything in my life so aggressively. I can say that.
Yeah. So let's put ourselves in an alternate reality where you are not at FinAI and you can put your mind to solving a different FinTech problem. What's a problem out there that needs to be solved? So what would you be working on if you weren't doing what you're doing now?
Well, I'm a bleeding heart. I come from the international development background. Having come from that world, I believe that the best way to solve social problems is through business, because it gives a resilience to it that you don't have. So something that's been really fascinating for me entering this world is still the extent that we are missing financial literacy, that we are missing opportunities for people who need them to actual financial services. And so I would work on something in that space. I just think it's really interesting. I think it's an area of opportunity. And one of our customers in South Africa, Time Bank, has just done a really good job of creating an exceptionally well-built, profitable business serving people who have previously not been served. So I think there's a really nice intersection of need and opportunity.
Perfect. You mentioned at one point the issues around biases in AI. How should founders and technologists approach these problems? And what are you doing to kind of address those problems within kind of the data sets you're using?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that we need to do, those of us who are on the business side and on the technical side working with artificial intelligence, is think about those ethical considerations. We want to be making sure that we're building things that we can stand behind, that live in the world, build the future that we want to see. As always, regulation is a little bit further behind where we are, but there's some great tools out there. So there's a principal tool called the Montreal Declaration. It was drafted in Montreal, but it's an international document. It gives principles of what we should be striving for when we're building artificial intelligence. They're working on the next generation of that, which is much more targeted, but things like the fairness principle. There's some very tangible tools that we can look at. So a tool that I like to use is called the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. It is a tool that it's an Excel sheet you can go through. You can answer all the questions about what it is that where you're getting your data, what are you using it for, what is the impact of it, and then has two appendices. That one is tells you what the risk level is of the predictions that you're making. So we're the lowest risk level in that if we don't get the prediction right, it's a frustrating experience in that we didn't understand that you were looking for your account balance as opposed to, I don't know, something else, all the way to a level 4, which is, a material prediction that will have long lasting implications on people's lives. Yeah. And then depending on your risk level, it tells you here are 1 to 9 things that you should have in place to mitigate the risk. So there's some great tools like that. To date, I've not yet seen anything where we're audited or where we've got really strict regulations, but I suspect that those are coming. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also a strong business practice, and that we should expect more regulation to come down the pipe.
Sure. So a lot of folks that are watching this right now maybe have not started yet or thinking about starting. What advice do you have kind of generally for folks that are ready to take that first step in their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so I think one of the hard things is when are you an entrepreneur when you're not an entrepreneur? If you want to be an entrepreneur, I think it's one of those things where you just have to step into it and say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm going to start working on this. And you just take it one step at a time. You start building out you start building out what your idea is and creating usually it's a deck around what it is. You start talking to a lot of people. When you want to start getting into it, you should tell everyone what it is you want to do. And everyone will give you different advice about why it sounds like a good idea, why it sounds like a bad idea, maybe different people you should meet. You know what you want to do. You take or leave whatever advice you want, but go and talk to a bunch of people and share your idea. Sometimes people ask, should I share my idea, keep it a secret? Ideas have no value. If someone can copy it when you tell them it today, they can copy it from you a year from now.
Sure.
So it's a good thing to know. So yeah, my advice really is the topic of this, which is just start doing it, telling people that you're doing it. It's amazing how all of a sudden you look back and you think, okay, we've got a product now, we've got a team now, we've got some money now. It just happens slowly.
Yeah. So FinTech, AI, tech in general, male-dominated fields. What are some advantages, disadvantages, learnings that you have from being a woman at the intersection of FinTech, AI, entrepreneurship?
Oh, I think it's a great thing. So my perspective is, you come to the table as who you are. We all have different facets of what it is that we bring to the table. Gender is obviously one of them. So I don't worry about the things that I can't control that are a disadvantage to me. Certainly there are some things that are a disadvantage. There's ski weekends that I'm sometimes, you know, there is the tech kind of world, sometimes like the boys ski weekends that I've been excluded from. And even though they're not technically work, that is where lots of the connections are made.
Sure.
That's where lots of investors have come from. But so I don't worry about it. I can't control it. But being a woman gives me a different set of accesses that my business partners don't have access to. And my approach is I should leverage those to the extent that I can. I've had access to different investor pools. So the BDC Women in Tech Fund has invested in us. Having a female founder is very powerful. It's amazing how much more often I get asked to speak to the media than my poor business partners who have worked equally as hard, because there is a consideration for diversity and there's just not nearly as many women to speak to. So been able to move that forward, get a lot more visibility for the company. I've been invited on trade trips. And also from a hiring perspective, your team is so important. And when you're looking, we really value a diverse team. It's something that we strive for. We believe it brings more ideas to the table and people want to see themselves. So our founding team is an Australian management consultant, a Canadian person from the NGO world, and an Indian software developer. We're diverse by nature. And I think that means that hopefully it helps us in terms of different places that we can access, people we can access, and being relatable to different groups.
I'm going to misquote it here, but when I Googled you before this, I saw something, an article where you were quoted as saying generally, a diverse workforce leads to conflict, and that's the point. Yeah. And like any good person in 2022, I only read the headline. So what was that?
It does. I think that I got asked about diversity a lot. And I didn't know anything about it, so I had to start reading up on it and developing an opinion on it. And my friend, who's with one of the big four and one of their HR kind of gurus, sent me this article that I just love because it resonated so strongly with me, which is, you know, we hear about diversity and how great diversity is, which I believe, but we don't actually talk about the success factors for making diversity work. So this article basically said, diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams unless they don't. So diverse teams tend to either really outperform or underperform. And the critical success factor is what you're doing is you're bringing people together who have different, you know, the countries that we come from really influence the way that we work and the assumptions that we have that we don't even know that we have, our professional backgrounds, our work experiences, you know, gender, all of these things influence who we are. So of course, when you get to the table, we're going to have different ways of working, different ways that we've seen things being done. And it takes longer to work through what's the best thing that we should do in this environment. So it takes time and it takes an ability to actually have meaningful, you know, respectful conversations where we don't have the same opinion. And when you can do that, you can get to a better outcome and you can get to more interesting ideas and better innovation. But if you can't do that, then it just tends to descend into conflict. So when we're hiring for people, something that we always look for and test for and are really careful about in our cultural interview is, what's this person's ability to work with people who are different from themselves? How willing are they to change their idea? You know, how much consideration and knowledge do they have about themselves and how they work, but also how other people might work around them?
That's great. See, never have to read past the interview or the headline, just get an interview with the person.
Yeah, it's a good headline though. It's pretty catchy, right?
I know, it's fantastic. I would have read, I just didn't have time. So that's about all we have time for, Nat. Thank you so much. This was a great dynamic presentation. This was a ton of fun. Covered a lot of stuff, which was fantastic. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with everybody. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you to BECU for working with us on this series. Mike for the intro. This has been a blast. We will be back next week with Matt Oppenheimer from Remitly, who's going to present customer centricity, the cornerstone of culture. Sign up for that and we'll see you all next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.